Back at the tail end of April, I had an opportunity to see a new documentary called Uncropped. Uncropped focuses on a photographer who previously I had never heard of, and chances are you might not have heard of him either. His name is James Hamilton, and for 4 decades, he worked as a staff photographer for 5 different publications in New York City, and he captured some of the most remarkable people and events in the last half century. I don't really want this to act as a proper artist spotlight episode on this channel because anything that I make will pale in comparison to what D.W. Young made with Uncropped, and I really want to urge everyone to go out and see it. Instead, I thought I'd just offer up some brief background on James Hamilton and give you my thoughts on what makes his photography and his story so compelling. Hamilton's career began in 1964 as a painter studying at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. In 1966, he found a summer job as an assistant in a studio of a fashion photographer. By summer's end, Hamilton did not return for his last 2 years of school, deciding instead to become a photographer and document his life in New York City. In 1969, he spent 5 months hitchhiking and taking pictures across America. After showing photos from a Texas music festival to the editors at the seminal music magazine Crawdaddy, he was hired on the spot as a staff photographer. This launched a 40-year career of staff positions at the Herald, the Village Voice, Harper's Bazaar, and the New York Observer. Hamilton also worked on assignment for many publications including New York Magazine, Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone, and as the stills photographer for directors like George A. Romero, Wes Anderson, and Noah Baumbach. So being a New York City photographer myself, I was instantly drawn and hooked into this documentary from the very first scene. We see James Hamilton roaming Washington Square Park with a camera in hand, just snapping photos of whatever he finds interesting. And he's got this laid-back, 1960s laissez-faire demeanor about him. And for the next hour and 50 minutes, I sat there getting to experience his life and his work for the very first time. And I gotta say, it was eye-opening. For many reasons, the first of which is the revelation that his photographs are so unique, so captivating, and there are so many of them, and they capture a period of time so energetic and mythical. His style is rich and in your face almost. His photos are imbued with sharp contrast, bright highlights due to his pervasive use of on-camera flash, and he often places a humorous detail within the shot that you don't see for a few seconds. He was put into a unique position at the publications he worked where he processed his own negatives, providing options to magazines rather than handing over the negatives and allowing them to choose and manipulate his images at their leisure. The second reason this film was eye-opening is why the hell haven't I heard of this guy before? There are New York City photographers who are practically household names at this point, like Richard Avedon, Weegee, and Diane Arbus. And James Hamilton is a photographer who could and should have been in league with these titans of the photography world. But as I said, James Hamilton is pretty laid back, and you get the sense that this lack of stardom is by design. He reminds me of a mixture of like Forrest Gump and Clint Eastwood's character Robert Kincaid from The Bridges of Madison County. Let me explain. Robert Kincaid, who, by the way, not a real guy, has this very laid-back attitude mixed with this charming, approachable swagger. And he reminds me of Forrest Gump because you're watching the documentary and it seems like this guy has been a part of every major American event and movement and met anyone and everyone of note from Alfred Hitchcock to the Beastie Boys. It has the same energy as Forrest Gump teaching Elvis how to dance or showing his ass to Lyndon B. Johnson. And I mean, in the trailer alone, he mentions having lunch with Liberace.
Raise your hand if you had lunch with Liberace.
And the next thing I want to get into is this feeling that I got while watching the film. I began to feel a sense of nostalgia for an era that I never actually experienced. And it made me equal parts happy and sad. Happy that it happened at all and that creatives like James Hamilton and Sylvia Plahe and the writers at the Village Voice were able to hone in on the epicenter of artistic and anarchistic movements in real time. And sad that it appears that we can never have something as monocultural as that period of time ever again. It's a feeling similar to when I watch something like the Robert Mapplethorpe documentary on HBO, or do a deep dive into CBGB's or Max's Kansas City and just the underground culture at the time. It's an era that has this propulsion, this bite to it that feels so desirable yet so murky and disgusting at the same time. I've thought about this a lot, and it's always been this strange contradiction within me. Like, I would have been eaten alive in this era that we're talking about. But it's fun to imagine and romanticize and glamorize something as objectively shitty as New York in the 80s. There's this lyric from a Mountain Goats song that I often quote whenever people want to get to know me a little bit better. The lyric goes, "I'm hardcore, but I'm not that hardcore." So yeah, when I think about this bygone era, I'm aware that that feeling is passing through the heavy filtration of the rose-colored glasses of history. And the documentary contributes to that narrative and makes this ragtag band of alt weekly staff writers and photographers seem like the coolest, most badass people in the city. For instance, when James Hamilton was 20, him and two of his buddies moved into a small bohemian rat trap of an apartment in Greenwich Village. He had a darkroom that he built into the kitchen that was barely big enough to even house a kitchen. And he actually has that apartment to this day. It seems like he had this unfettered access to concert venues, hotels where celebrities were staying at, galas that celebrities were attending. And one time he got to drive across the country with a Village Voice writer and take photos and pick up stories along the way. For lack of a better term, it felt like this merger that was the Wild West of photography and journalism. And one thing that the documentary does so well is shine an equal spotlight onto the importance of alt-weekly countercultural journalism. The New York Times review of this film, Uncropped, ends with this. "It was a time of experimentation and feisty editorial staffs. A time before algorithms took over the way we consume news and culture. It wasn't perfect, the budgets weren't always great, nobody got everything right. But it's an era that's gone, and one worth mourning. Golden ages are generally mythical, but it's hard to say we're better off now, and Uncropped makes an excellent case for what we lost." Now, one could look at this, and the film as a whole, as having some heavy old man yells at cloud energy.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
But as is the case with a lot of romanticism for the days of yore, there is an inkling of truth to it. I feel like I'd rather not get bogged down too much with this point because it's something that I might revisit in the future, and frankly, I'd love to hear from folks who were maybe a part of this golden age that we're talking about. Tell me what made it so great in the comments, and what contributed to this downfall if you believe that there was one at all. Anyway, one other thing that made me fascinated about James Hamilton and made me want to be best friends with him is his love of movies. I know I don't talk about it on this channel a lot because it isn't what it's for, but I am a giant film nerd. I think the proper term is cinephile, but honestly that sounds a little too clinical and sterile. It almost undercuts the emotion and the passion for film in movies that I have. So seeing that he was such a giant film nerd that had the opportunity to photograph the likes of Alfred Hitchcock and Kurosawa and Godard, and then become an on-set stills photographer for people like Wes Anderson and George A. Romero, I don't know, it was so delightful and it made me almost giddy with hope. And throughout this whole video, I've been showing you photos by James Hamilton, and maybe you like them, maybe you don't. But it's the cultural context surrounding them that, for me, elevates them to this legendary status. You may not be someone who sees value in celebrity, but James Hamilton recognized something about the culture makers of his generation, and what he offers up is an inside look at these culture makers. A look that, to my eyes, brings them back down to reality, makes their success seem as attainable as putting on a three-piece suit. His photos aren't precisely lit or composed, and they aren't doctored to the point of telling a lie. He isn't shooting fashion editorials in the vein of Richard Avedon or Erwin Blumenfeld. And I'm not knocking those guys, but what James Hamilton does is a bit different. And seeing the film and seeing his attitude and his demeanor and his humble nature makes him almost an enigmatic figure surrounded by the glitz and glamour in high society. The film, Uncropped, has this charm, and if you're a fan of photography and the history of photography, which I assume anyone watching this is, it gets you so engaged with Hamilton's work that it makes you just want to share it with everyone you know. And so that's what I'm attempting to do here. I have no affiliation with the filmmakers or anything. I'm not being asked to promote the film, but I'm a photography lover and I'm a film lover, and I'd be remiss if I didn't take some time to talk about this film and talk about James Hamilton. And down in the description of this video, you'll find links to the film's website and where you could watch it online. And I highly, highly encourage anyone who made it this far into the video to go ahead and watch the film. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for indulging in my ramblings. I know it's been kind of a weird, chaotic month, maybe 2 months of videos coming out. I've been very busy, but quite frankly, that should be winding down pretty soon, so I should get back to sort of regular scheduled programming pretty soon. I'm going to end this video like I end most of my other artist spotlight videos, with a bunch of photos by the photographer that we're focusing on, in this case, James Hamilton. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out, and I'll see you all next time.